Welcome to the CDA Institute's Expert Series, the podcast that brings you in-depth conversations with the brightest minds in defense, security, foreign policy, and international relations. Each week, we delve into the most pressing issues facing our world today. Our esteemed guests offer unique insights and analysis that you won't find anywhere else. In this week's episode, former Canadian military representative to NATO, Darren Hawco, and former Canadian permanent representative to NATO, Yves Brodeur, highlight key topics that are anticipated to be discussed at the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius next week, including Ukraine, the strategic concept, defense expenditure goals, innovation, Canada's defense policy, the upcoming DPU, how it might align with NATO's current objectives and priorities, as well as Canada's need to reaffirm its commitment and preserve trust among NATO allies. This is the Expert Series. Mr. Hawco, thanks for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. From your perspective, what are some of the key topics or issues that you anticipate will be discussed at the upcoming summit, and what impact could these discussions have on Canada's defense and security interests?
If I think about it, I would probably say there will be 5 key agenda items. The first will, of course, be on Ukraine and the situation in regards to Russia's illegal immigration and it will invasion. And it will be about, is it security guarantees? Is it a fast track to membership? What is the perspective? I think the alliance has learned lessons from the original perspectives they took towards Georgia and Ukraine, which led to Russia essentially creating a border dispute with those two through invasion or illegal annexation, and that creating a challenge for continued progress towards membership. So Canada, as an advocate of the Ukraine and a very supportive ally of the situation that is facing Ukraine, that will be a key topic. Then I would say, really, it's the strategic concept. It's 3 real underpinning implementation elements, that being the deploying of troops, the increase of exercises, and then the increase of NATO development targets. And so it will be about an implementation update. Where are they with that? And from a Canadian point of view, being able to push 30 battalions in 30 days, or moving from 40,000 relatively rapidly mobile troops to maybe as many as 300,000, that will present a massive challenge for the alliance, and Canada will earn its 6% share of that. I say that because that's roughly our measure of GDP per the alliance, and that tends to equate to what our financial contributions are and our deployment contributions. And then the next one, Josh, I would say, is really the dollar figure. Is 2% a goal or a floor? How serious is that going to be? The US election is not that far in the future. The geographic influences in the alliance in relation to this topic. And really then, is the extent to which innovation, that's an exciting new development in the context of investments, such as the Diana initiative and the like. But there will be continued pressure. And what we've seen in AUKUS is a reflection of Canada's engagement and its willingness to spend, and that's written or underwritten by years of Canadian approach to NATO.
The Vilnius summit presents an opportunity for Canada to reassess its military needs and maybe make commitments to increase defense expenditures. In your view, what specific areas or capabilities should Canada prioritize to effectively address current and future challenges?
The investment, the dollar value of investment, whether it's 2% or some other figure. I mean, given the relative maturity of the investment intentions for Canada in the air and the maritime domains, it would be my judgment that the focus ought to be on the land domain. And there is a significant range of capital investments that Canada is intending to make in the land domain. If I was to just name, a few, I think it would be like the Joint Deployable HQ signals modernization. It would be ground-based air defense. It would be camp sustainment capabilities. It would be joint fires modernization. It would be land command control support systems in the tactical C2 and communications areas, remotely piloted aerial vehicles, or whatever term the project shape is taking these days. All of these are in either definition or approaching definition in classic project vernacular. But what I would offer in particular is all of these together represent an enormous doctrinal moment for the Canadian Army about how it wants to fight, how it wants to prepare itself, and what it needs to do to be able to look at near-peer, 3-block, and asymmetric warfare, because all of those will be part of the challenge space facing the Canadian military in the future. So these are the areas that the focus of government should be on at this point in time, in my opinion.
What are the expected changes in NATO's regional military plans and force model, and how will they redefine the alliance's defense strategies? How might these changes enhance NATO's capabilities and address emerging security challenges?
When you're thinking strategic choices, you tend to go, okay, well, what's our goal? And then you say, how are we going to play in that? How are we going to win? What capabilities do you need and what investments do you need? And you tend to follow with strategy and then you work towards concept. I think NATO is in an unusual situation in that it came up with the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, and then it's come up with its strategic concept after the fact. Now, I presume there's going to be a significant alignment between those documents. I say that because I was involved in the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area development. And when I was leaving the alliance in 2020, we were in discussions around what a strategic concept needed to look like. That all being said, I think the continuing risk to NATO due to the Ukraine and the unpredictability of the Russian Federation's actions, particularly in regards to the emergence of a nuclear element to the deterrence dialogue, that makes the situation significantly more dangerous than it might otherwise have been. I mean, would one think that a conflict in Ukraine could spill over and impact NATO allies? Well, we've seen a minor example, a minor tragedy in weapon systems that failed and resulted in casualties in Poland. We're aware of the economic impact. We're aware of the millions of refugees that have needed to be supported from Ukraine in its neighboring countries, NATO allies who are stepping forward to deal with that from a regional point of view. So I think we'll see the military plans that have been set in place as an initial spring from the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area really just be crystallized in practical form. We'll see the force model planning, and we'll see what nations are able to support in regards to investments, knowing it's going to take many years, Josh, for countries to realize the increase in size. So this is more about trajectory than it is immediate ability and effect. However, I think that the shift in classic deterrence theory to represent a balance of nuclear and non-nuclear realities is probably the thing that will challenge the alliance the most in this situation, because it's quite sobering, and it has been many a decade since leaders have had to be thinking along these lines, and so it must be quite daunting as a security challenge. And then I would be remiss not to highlight, because I do think China, as an example, will to talk about the agenda items that will be discussed at the leaders summit, whether it is a formal agenda or many bilateral topics. The role of China, whether it be provision of support to Russia or in their own strategic objectives in the long term, that will be both a topic of the day, and it will also be one of those things that will be woven into as a deliberately considered security challenge.
As a former military representative of Canada to the NATO Military Committee, I'm wondering if you could discuss some of the key challenges or opportunities you encountered in promoting defense cooperation and coordination among NATO member states.
Every nation has interests, and therefore every nation has a defense and security bias, which is very fair and understandable. And then I would say, by and large, my experience in 2 years over a quite challenging period is there's general agreement on things, but there's rare alignment on their priority and the character of them. There are different groups. And so what do I mean when I say that? And because different groups have the different interests. You have original NATO joiners, you have the eastern countries of NATO, you have the Baltics as a sub-element of that, you have the allies who are preoccupied with risks from the south and southern challenges that they bear a unique relationship with. Then you have the Balkans. Then you have those countries that are from the EU and in the EU, or those that are non-EU countries, and therefore there are competing risks there. I would argue that Germany and France have a pride of place in those security architectures that animates their own national agenda. Then I would also highlight that Turkey doesn't fit naturally in any of those buckets to some extent, and has a very interesting, challenging political military dynamic inside their own country when you consider the last 70 years in Turkey. So the challenge also creates opportunities in negotiation for a country like Canada, where we're not seen as having a particular axe to grind often, and so we are often asked, well, what do you think, as an honest broker? And so that's an interesting dynamic from just a purely Canadian point of view. And then the NAC, the North Atlantic Council, versus the military representatives in CHOD format. So they have, obviously they carry similar perspectives, similar national issues, similar national ways of describing things. However, there are quite a few differences in how a political layer will talk to an issue versus a military practitioner who's looking to get to yes in a fair and reasonable way. So it's quite a challenging dynamic, but it's more about how long it will take to get to where we need to get to, and what concessions need to be made to advance a broader agenda.
In what ways would you say SSE is currently aligned with NATO's present objectives and priorities? With the DPU coming out soon, do you suspect that it might further align our defense policy with that of NATO?
Well, you have to accept the bias of my answer, right? Because I was involved in it. And also I have certain constraints regarding cabinet confidence. No document could stay true over multiple years. But I think if we look at it in buckets, we would say one, that I think the currency of strong, secure, and engaged is still both good and supportive of NATO's objectives and priorities. First, from a people point of view, recruiting, training, retention, diversity, a culture of respect, emphasis on recruitment and culture. Today, I would say that would be a nuance or an emphasis that we would expect a DPU to put. I would wager that fixing defense funding, stay the course, have a publicly published investment plan and investment intentions. That's so important for industry and for the general public, as well as our allies. So if we look at those two things, the size and shape of the military, that's what NATO is expecting. That's what NATO wants to have as a deployable combat capable ally like in Canada. And they want the defense funding. I think clearly the alliance is going to say it's not where it needs to be. It's not sufficiently close. You can't say it's close to where it needs to be. It's not sufficiently close. So that's a fair challenge and criticism. And then I would say the longer term investments in the Army, Navy, Air Force, SOF, we kind of covered that earlier in one of your questions. What I would say is that in the defense policy update, there ought to be a significant focus on these longer term investments, in particular in some areas such as the cloud-based enabling capabilities, autonomous systems, joint capabilities, and artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the role that they are and will play in supporting autonomous systems and more broadly. So I'm not sure that the Canadian government has ever taken a NATO central position in any of its defense policies in the past, and therefore I think it would not be likely it would be a very NATO centrist point. It'll balance North America, our role in the world, and NATO as one of our cornerstone alliances, along with our Five Eyes partnerships. And I think history will bear that rough framework, Josh, will see its way through. What I would finish with, though, and hand the baton back to you, is that generally speaking, strong, secure, and engaged, and I'm very confident the defense policy update, if it maintains the same investment trajectory and supports those investment needs, that the Canadian military has put down as required, and that are generally aligned with NATO, that the alliance will look at that and say, okay, we like what Canada has, we just never get enough. And so that will be the continuing challenge for us.
Darren, you've been great today. Thanks for providing so much analysis and in-depth insights on all of these topics. Before we wrap up, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts on anything we discussed today, or if maybe we missed something that you'd like to speak to that it's important for our audience to understand.
If I double clicked on just a few things and then one new thought, I would double click on the absolute importance of a public facing investment plan. If Canada expects industry to support with the type of technological capabilities that are required and the resilient supply chain that is required, they need to know what the long-term investment ambitions over a time horizon are going to be and be prepared for that. And the country needs to deliver on that. I think many people have commented on the challenges of procurement in Canada, so I won't belabor that. I would not so much double click, but just emphasize the importance of combat capable troops and capabilities as opposed to security based or taking on a predominantly training role. You want experts to teach. You don't want people who just teach, right? So to do that, you need to have hardcore practitioners, the men and women who can go into harm's way as necessary on behalf of Canada. That's the type of military that Canada requires. And then if I imagined that kind of future lens, what would it be? I would say that would be the new area, Josh, I would add to the discussion. Like, what would be the critical priorities and areas that we would want to focus on, whether it be in support of NATO or otherwise? Advanced weapon systems like those sold by Russia and China, and that will be in the hands of potential adversaries. The role of artificial intelligence, the bias, the risk of autonomous weapon systems. The risk to our critical infrastructure sectors. We should always expect there to be gray zone or whatever type of below the line of deliberate and active combat efforts, whether it be information, misinformation, disinformation, or election interference. The critical infrastructure sectors, our supply chain, the government needs to have a recognized way to support that part of our critical infrastructure. And then I would probably just finish on the concept of interoperability, interchangeability. We see in Ukraine as an example, and there's always a risk of focusing too much on one conflict to be illustrative of all conflict. But the lesson that is being learned about not every ammunition, even if it's the same caliber, can be used in every weapon system. Not every weapon system provided without the spare parts necessary can be as valuable as you'd think it would be. And so these are great things for us to hoist in to make sure that our own approach to future combat is well considered.
Darren, once again, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. Mr. Brodeur, pleasure to meet you, and thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Let's get right into it. What do you expect might be the central areas of focus or the main issues at the upcoming NATO summit, and what might we expect from the 2023 communique?
I just want to, as an opening remark, to point a few things. First of all, this summit in Vilnius will take place more or less a year and a half after the brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So, and it is a key moment as well for NATO, because there are a couple of things that I think are also going to influence this meeting in terms of backdrop issues. And some are pretty fundamental to the extent that actually you could probably argue that the political, strategic, global environment has changed quite significantly over the last, I would say, year and a half since Madrid. For instance, of course, what happened in Russia over the last few days is kind of interesting. I don't want to sort of try and conclude anything out of that. I think that it's pretty early for that, much too early. And but yet, this is an important factor that will certainly be in the mind of leaders when they meet in Vilnius. Other issues such as the rise of China, it's not per se an issue that NATO is really preoccupied with because of what the treaty is all about. It wasn't the time when I was ambassador there, but it's certainly a big issue that is actually having an impact on the overall strategic security environment. And again, I think leaders will have that on their mind. There is something that's ongoing. I don't think I could find the right way to describe it, but there's this sort of a movement, this trend that actually drives some nations away from democracy, liberal democracy as we know it, which is, by the way, something that NATO, it's part of its mission to defend that liberal democracy and the values that come with it. But right now there's something happening. There's a shift, including within some of NATO nations. So that's there, and it's something also that actually is worth considering when you're thinking about Vilnius. Other issues, climate change. In Madrid, there was a passing reference in the declaration on climate change, but NATO has been more vocal on that through the words of the Secretary General. A number of issues or actions were adopted, initiatives from NATO. The whole issue of emerging challenges, such as, of course, climate I mentioned, but the Arctic remains there, and we have a big interest in that as a country, as a nation. The question of energy is coming at us in a big way. Water, interesting enough, it's an issue that we don't hear a lot about, but I know that NATO has been actually looking at it to some extent. So there's a number of things that actually will be there to color the whole thing. The other thing I would like to say, and it's the question of, and going back to the issue of the war that's raging, brutal war in Ukraine, there are lessons to be learned about that. A year and a half into it, I would hope that NATO nations and NATO as an institution, as an alliance, has been looking at the lessons that one should learn from what's happening right now in that part of the world, not only in terms of political issues, but also in terms of strategy, tactic. You could see that the nature of warfare is being affected by what's going on there. So there's a lot of work to be done. The last thing I want to say is that NATO, over the last year and a half, has been, I guess it's coming at Vilnius with a certain degree of success in terms of unity and solidarity, which is actually I would say the main strength of NATO. It's been reinforced, if only because Finland and Sweden Finland is now a full-fledged member. It will be the first time that Finland sits at the summit as a full-fledged member. Sweden is an invitee. Accession process ratification actually is still underway, blocked by two nations, Hungary and Turkey. That I think is going to be one of the different topic there, and certainly one that actually NATO nations, I guess, and Secretary General Stoltenberg would like to see solved at Vilnius. I'm not too sure I would expect that, but anyway, so NATO has actually a lot of good things to say about itself, about the alliance and its impact. Now, what are going to be the big issues? I think that you're going to see again Ukraine, Ukraine, and Ukraine as being the first topic on the agenda in terms of renewing again commitment of allies to support Ukraine politically as well as militarily. You will have also coming out of that a very strong, I think, commitment, I guess, to transatlantic relations coming from all allies, United States first and foremost, but others as well. NATO, I think, will want to talk also about the issue of the one that will never go away, the two-person. What's happening with that? I'll come back to that a little later. Looming issue, new Secretary General, an issue that you won't really hear a lot about in public because it never happened like that. It doesn't happen like that at NATO. It's a discussion that takes place in corridors, at the cafeteria, wherever among nations. But I think that you could probably expect or imagine at least that there will be consultations among leaders about what next, who comes after Stoltenberg. There's been a lot of talk about him actually being extended. There's a big show as well, which will take place, a bargaining process at the EU, which is not foreign to all this because normally it's part of the mix somehow. So I think that those are going to be the issues. The Balkans as well is going to come back and not in a nice way. Kosovo, Serbia, issue K4. You could see that right now trouble is brewing again, and that will also, I think, take some time. The rest of the issues, I think, again, will be pretty much dominated by Ukraine, Russia, what to do with Russia, and the two-person. So that is what I think I could see as being the main topics. If I may, I just want to talk a bit about Canada in this, because we too are walking into that summit with some of our own concerns and what we would want out of it. My own personal view of this is that Canada will have some work to do in terms of reaffirming its strong commitment to the alliance in terms of its capabilities. We've been sort of bruised a little over the last little while in terms of our capacity to deploy, take part in critical exercises, and about our military spending, of course, our defense expenditures, and all that. So the Prime Minister will want to actually send a pretty strong message in terms of Canada being an ally that can be really trusted, sort of try and deal with any doubt that could exist about Canada's strength and commitment in terms of its contribution to the alliance. So that's the way I see it. I don't think that you could expect anything very different from what happened in Madrid, but there will be certainly a strong, the volume will be turned on, I guess, amplification of what was said then. But again, Ukraine is going to be the top issue. So that would be my take on the summit.
How do you evaluate Canada's contributions presently to NATO? What does Canada need to do to ensure it has the trust of its NATO allies? As you mentioned, we've been under a lot of scrutiny lately for our contributions and for not meeting the 2% threshold. So I'm wondering if you could provide some insight or analysis on this.
Well, as you know, the two-person issue is someone that's very dear to Secretary General Stoltenberg's heart, so he will push on that. He made it clear, I think it was in Washington, that this would be an important issue in terms of trying to make it less of a goal, but more as an obligation, and basically take the two-person not so much as a ceiling, but as the floor, as he said, in terms of spending. Personal, again, comment on that. I never really, let me rephrase this thing. To me, the two-person is an accounting thing. It's something that actually was a target. It was a goal. But essentially, it's hard to understand exactly how, why is it 2%? Why is it actually, where is that number coming from? Not actually clear. The other thing is that the way it is being calculated by different nations varies greatly in terms of what you include in that or not. So when I look at the whole issue of defense expenditure, my take on it is more about what it is that Canada wants to do. Is it equipped to do what it's supposed to do? And what are our priorities? And essentially, that gives you an answer where you want to spend, how much you want to spend, how much you can spend. So I guess what I'm talking about is the famous defense review that we've been waiting for, well, it's been a long time now, which we haven't seen yet. But I think that the first and foremost thing that the PM should have in mind when he goes to NATO is not necessarily to make a strong commitment to reach the 2%, but basically reassure allies that we're doing everything we can to reinforce our military capacity, that we can actually invest, we are, and that we will try to actually invest quickly, if only because we as a nation need it. We need it to ensure our own safety. And right now we're in a difficult situation. The other thing that actually we don't hear a lot about, but I think is as important in terms of where Canada stands, it's our readiness. What's the percentage of our readiness? How we prepare to deploy? How much? How fast? How quickly? And my sense, talking to a few people, is that we're not as ready as we think we are, or as we should be. There are no official numbers about that, but basically, I think that the fact that we decided not to take part into this major air exercise, NATO air exercise, in Germany a few weeks ago, speaks volume about our capacity to deploy quickly and our readiness to action. So complicated by a number of small issues which are still out there, which are not helpful. For instance, the fact that some, apparently, our militaries, soldiers, had to buy their own equipment in Latvia. The fact that we're not doing any air policing, not joining any air policing mission this year. Sure, I mean, we've been active, taking an active part in air policing in the past, but we're not doing it now. Our Navy is very slowly being reinforced. It's looking better, but we're far away from actually where it should be in terms of being able to even to patrol our own waters, 3 oceans, to ensure that we're safe and secure and we can project our power. We have only 1 support ship, and frankly, that's not enough for a nation that has 3 oceans. Anyway, so these are the issues. I think that no one is going to actually challenge Canada in terms of its contribution to NATO. But we have a big job to do in terms of reassuring allies that we're investing where we need to. Is it going to be 2%? I doubt it. That would mean, I guess, doubling our budget, defense budget, which is something I don't see happening in the short term. So I think we'll have some work to do on that. But again, we're not going to oppose. I doubt it. We never did. But we've probably signaled very openly, frankly, and in a transparent way that we're not going to be meeting the 2% anytime soon. So that's for it. I think that there's one more thing I would like to say about that. It's the question of sustainability as well. In a way, I guess Canada will point at the fact that we've been taking part in almost every military operation against NATO's command. Can we sustain that over time? Can we actually deploy, I don't know, say 3,000 people for more than 3 months? Question that actually hasn't been answered, something that you don't see very often in the papers and not being discussed. But I think that military officers would have an interesting answer to that question. So that's pretty much for Canada at NATO, but I think there's work to do there.
In your opinion, does Ukraine exhibit the criteria required for NATO membership at this time? Should Canada support Ukraine's NATO membership bid, and what would the implications of Ukraine NATO membership be?
Well, that's a long one and a tricky one. I'll start with supporting Ukraine. Yes, we are supportive, as Secretary General Stoltenberg said, all NATO allies over time. And once the war is over, there's a quote that I just added here from Stoltenberg, and I quote him saying, it's not the full quote, but the important part: all NATO members agreed that Ukraine will eventually join the alliance once the war is over. So once the war is over is ambitious. The other thing is that eventually actually is what that means. What does that mean exactly? Hard to say. There was never, when I was at NATO, an appetite to bring Ukraine in the fold for strategic reasons. Although in 2008, the allies actually all agreed again that one day Ukraine and Georgia, by the way, during that discussion, would eventually join NATO. So we're all supportive. Canada is also part of the of that support. Contributes that support is basically in favor of that. But as the Prime Minister said, when the conditions allow. So what are the conditions? Not really spelled out clearly. So there will be a pretty, I think, important discussion. Now, if you look at the membership accession process at NATO, there are quite specific criteria, such as, for instance, being a democracy, protection of minority rights, resolution of conflicts in a peaceful way, so on and so forth, having essentially society based on the rule of law with an economy that's open. So you could sort of, take that, look at the situation in Ukraine and tick the boxes or not. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of meeting all these requirements. That would be my take on it. How long will it take? I don't know. Will it happen? Maybe. Meanwhile, the question of offering guarantees to Ukraine on a bilateral basis is something that is already happening through the group of allies which are providing weapons, training, and all that. There are some discussions about providing more, I say, supportive initiatives, more, but what would that be different? I think it won't be very different than what you can see now. Maybe better organized, maybe more important, I don't know, but training, providing weapons system, that sort of thing. Short of being involved in the conflict, I don't think that allies will want to do that. Germany and France, if my memory serves me right, are the nations that actually made some public comment about the possibility of offering guarantees, security guarantees to Ukraine, but again, without actually developing and defining what these guarantees could be. So I think we're, as I said, we're supportive. Canada is, as all other allies. Is Ukraine ready? My own personal view, no. And I think that there would be, at this point, extreme reluctance to actually consider even the beginning of an access process for Ukraine at NATO. Not Stoltenberg is right, saying, once the war is over, then we can look at it again, but not going to happen again, not soon.
Mr. Brodeur, thanks again for joining us. Before we wrap up this interview, I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts or points you'd like to make for our viewers, or if you'd like to touch on anything that we haven't yet.
Well, I guess if I had to say something, and this morning I was thinking, okay, I'm there at NATO with my prime minister, as I was in the past. What would be my message, my advice to him? And my advice would be that you need to go out there, be strong, and essentially put a marker down that we are a trusted ally. We intend to remain a trusted ally, and actually that we will put the effort, the energy, and probably the money. We're already doing that to make sure that we are still able to contribute in a significant way to NATO. That would be my take on it. The second thing is that the Prime Minister has to speak to Canadians as well. I know that somehow, judging from the comments in the public domain about military spending, he's probably not a big fan of telling Canadians we've got to spend huge amounts of money. And security defense doesn't come out cheap. You can't build up an armed force where it's named on the cheap. That doesn't happen. But he's got to actually start to talk to Canadians and about the tragic challenges that we're faced as a country, and tell them that somehow this is really important. This is crucial. I mean, the future is coming at us, and some of it is not actually reassuring, I would say. And we need to, it's a job. We need to actually tell people, you don't like it, but we need to start to really invest seriously in our defense if we want to play our role in continental defense, first and foremost. I mean, we have a big neighbor down south that actually is looking at us as well, saying, well, you guys have to get your act together and really start, putting serious money in this thing. So the Prime Minister has to talk to Canadians. That's why he was elected, and tell them, we need to really look at this seriously and start putting money in this thing. We need to stop thinking that we are immune to these kind of threats and challenges. That would be my final word on that.
Well, Yves, thanks for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. I enjoyed talking to you very much, and I look forward to future engagements. That's all for this week's episode of the CDA Institute Expert Series. To learn more about the CDA Institute, you can visit our website at cdainstitute.ca or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks, and we hope you'll be joining us next week.